Women over 60. If your older man says this, the relationship is in trouble. There are phrases that sound harmless on the surface. Things men say that we brush off as minor frustrations or temporary moods. But relationship experts who specialize in couples over 60 know better. Certain statements, when they start appearing in conversations, are red flags, early warnings that the relationship is eroding in ways that will be difficult to repair if you don't address them immediately. The challenge is that these phrases don't announce themselves as problems. They're often delivered casually, in passing, disguised as jokes or observations. By the time most women recognize them as the warnings they are, the damage has already taken root. The respect has already started cracking. The emotional distance has already begun. Maya Angelou said, "When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time." The same wisdom applies to what men tell you about how they see the relationship. When certain phrases start appearing, they're showing you exactly where things stand, and ignoring those signals won't make them less true. At 60 and beyond, we don't have time to waste on relationships that are slowly deteriorating while we pretend everything's fine. We need to recognize trouble when it announces itself, even when it does so quietly. And we need the courage to address it directly instead of hoping it will somehow resolve it on its own. If you're ready to understand what phrases signal real trouble and what to do when you hear them, you're in the right place. This channel is dedicated to honest conversations about relationships at our age, the kind that don't sugarcoat reality, but help you navigate it with clarity and strength. Consider subscribing if you want truth instead of comfortable denial. We're building a community of women who face reality directly and make decisions from strength, not fear.
Number 1. You're being too sensitive. When Margaret's partner David started saying this casually, almost dismissively, she tried to believe him. Maybe she was overreacting. Maybe she was reading too much into his tone, his increasingly frequent criticisms, his habit of making plans without consulting her. Maybe the problem was her perception, not his behavior. This phrase is dangerous because it makes you doubt your own reality. It's a form of dismissal that shifts responsibility from his behavior to your reaction, making you the problem rather than addressing what prompted your response in the first place. And when a man starts using this phrase regularly, he's telling you something crucial. Your feelings don't matter to him as much as his comfort does. Healthy relationships involve two people who take each other's feelings seriously, even when they don't fully understand them. When something bothers you, a man who respects you asks questions, tries to understand, adjusts his behavior if it's causing you pain. He doesn't tell you that your feelings are wrong or excessive. He doesn't make you feel crazy for having a legitimate emotional response to his actions. Margaret finally recognized this phrase for what it was when David used it after canceling plans with her for the third time in 2 weeks. She'd expressed hurt and frustration, and instead of apologizing or acknowledging the pattern, he said, "You're being too sensitive. It's not that big a deal." In that moment, she understood. He wasn't interested in how his behavior affected her. He was interested in her not bothering him with inconvenient emotions. When a man regularly tells you you're being too sensitive, the relationship is in trouble. He's dismissing your reality, invalidating your feelings, and training you to stop bringing up anything that might require him to change or take responsibility. That's not partnership. It's emotional abandonment. Number 2. I shouldn't have to tell you what I need. Patricia heard this from James during a conversation about household responsibilities. She'd asked him to be more specific about what he needed from her, and instead of answering, he said with obvious frustration, "I shouldn't have to tell you. You should just know." This phrase reveals a man who expects you to be a mind reader, who believes that if you really loved him or understood him, you'd anticipate his needs without him having to communicate them. It's an impossible standard that sets you up for constant failure, because no one can consistently guess what another person needs without clear communication. Men who say this are often operating from old relationship models where women were expected to intuit and meet men's needs without being asked. It's a refusal to do the adult work of actually communicating, and it puts all the responsibility for the relationship's emotional functioning on you. You're supposed to figure out what he needs, deliver it perfectly, and never require him to articulate anything clearly. What makes this particularly troubling is that it shuts down communication entirely. If he shouldn't have to tell you what he needs, then any conversation about unmet needs becomes your failure, rather than an opportunity for both of you to understand each other better. You end up walking on eggshells, trying to anticipate and preempt his dissatisfaction, which is exhausting and ultimately impossible. Patricia tried for months to be better at anticipating James's needs, but she kept failing because the target kept moving. What he wanted one week, he didn't want the next. What made him happy one day annoyed him another. She finally realized the problem wasn't her inability to read his mind, it was his refusal to use his words. And a man who won't communicate clearly while expecting you to guess correctly is creating a relationship dynamic designed for your failure. When you hear, "I shouldn't have to tell you," the relationship is in trouble. He's refusing to do the basic work of partnership, which is clear communication, and he's making you responsible for his emotional well-being without giving you the information you'd need to actually support him. Number 3, you've changed. This phrase sounds neutral, almost observational. But when Richard said it to Helen after she'd started setting boundaries around her time and refusing to cancel her plans whenever he wanted her available, the accusation underneath was clear. She had changed. She'd stopped making herself endlessly available, stopped putting his preferences above her own needs. And he wasn't saying "you've changed" as neutral observation. He was saying it as complaint, as indictment. "You've changed" is often code for "you've stopped doing what I want," or "you're no longer as easy to control." Men use this phrase when women start advocating for themselves, maintaining boundaries, expecting reciprocity. It's meant to make you feel guilty for growth, for self-advocacy, for refusing to stay in whatever diminished version of yourself he'd gotten comfortable with. Helen had changed. She'd realized over several months that she'd been making herself smaller to accommodate Richard's preferences, and she'd consciously decided to reclaim her full self. She rejoined activities he didn't enjoy. She made plans with friends even when he wanted her company. She voiced opinions that differed from his. And Richard's response, "You've changed," was his way of saying he preferred the version of her that required less negotiation, less accommodation of her needs, less recognition of her as a separate person with her own life. The healthy response to a partner's growth is curiosity and adjustment, not complaint. A man who values you welcomes your evolution, makes space for your changing needs, negotiates the relationship's new shape together with you. A man who resents your growth and weaponizes "you've changed" as criticism is telling you he preferred you diminished, and he's not interested in partnering with your full self. When a man says "you've changed" with resentment rather than curiosity, the relationship is in trouble. He's signaling that he wants you to stay static in whatever form was most convenient for him, and he's not interested in growing alongside you. Have you heard phrases like these in your relationships? Share your experiences in the comments. Your voice matters here.
Number 4, I don't want to talk about it. Susan tried for weeks to have a conversation with Michael about intimacy, about feeling disconnected, about needing more emotional closeness. Every time she brought it up, Michael shut her down with the same phrase, "I don't want to talk about it." Not, "Let's talk about it later when I've had time to think." Not, "This is hard for me, but let's try." Just a flat refusal to engage with anything that made him uncomfortable. This phrase, when it becomes a pattern, signals that he's unwilling to do the work relationships require. Every partnership faces challenges, moments of disconnection, issues that need addressing. Couples who navigate these successfully do so through communication, difficult, sometimes uncomfortable conversations that require vulnerability from both people. When a man consistently refuses to talk about problems, he's essentially saying the relationship's health matters less than his comfort. What makes this particularly damaging is that it leaves you alone with all the relationship's difficulties. You're the one noticing problems, worrying about them, trying to find solutions, while he simply opts out of the process entirely. The burden of maintaining the relationship falls entirely on you, and that's not sustainable. Michael's refusal to talk meant that every issue festered. The distance between them grew. Susan's needs remained unmet and unacknowledged. She felt increasingly alone in a relationship that was technically still intact, but emotionally hollow. And because Michael wouldn't engage in conversations about any of it, there was no path forward, no way to repair what was breaking. When a man consistently says, "I don't want to talk about it," in response to legitimate relationship concerns, the relationship is in serious trouble. He's checked out emotionally while still occupying the space physically, and you cannot build intimacy or connection with someone who refuses to engage. Number 5. That's just how I am. When Linda tried to discuss Kenneth's habit of making decisions without consulting her, planning weekends, making purchases that affected both of them, changing arrangements without letting her know, his response was simple. That's just how I am. I've always been this way. This phrase is a refusal to grow, to adapt, to consider that behaviors that work for you living alone might not work in partnership. It's a defense mechanism that presents personality as fixed and unchangeable, as if decades of life experience have crystallized him into a form that can no longer bend or adjust for anyone, including someone he claims to care about. The reality is that we're all just how we are until we decide to be different. Every person carries patterns and habits formed over decades, but people who truly value relationships understand that partnership requires adjustment, compromise, sometimes changing behaviors that don't serve the relationship, even if those behaviors feel natural or comfortable. That's just how I am is a refusal to do that work. Kenneth was essentially telling Linda that she could accept him exactly as he was, including behaviors that affected her negatively, or she could leave. He wasn't interested in meeting her halfway. He wasn't willing to consider that maybe how he was included some patterns that needed adjusting for the relationship to thrive. He was drawing a line. His comfort and habits mattered more than her needs or the partnership's health. Linda stayed for another year, increasingly frustrated and resentful, before she finally recognized that Kenneth had been telling her the truth from the beginning. He was exactly how he was, and he had no intention of changing regardless of how it affected her. That's not partnership. It's cohabitation with someone who is fundamentally unwilling to bend. When a man uses "that's just how I am" to shut down conversations about behaviors that affect you, the relationship is in trouble. He's prioritizing his comfort over your needs and the relationship's well-being, and he's made it clear he won't do the work partnership requires. What these phrases really mean. All of these statements share a common thread. They're ways of avoiding responsibility, shutting down communication, and prioritizing his comfort over the relationship's health. They signal that he's not interested in the mutual work partnership requires, the negotiation, the vulnerability, the willingness to be influenced by your needs and feelings. When you start hearing these phrases regularly, you're not being too demanding or expecting too much. You're recognizing that the man you're with has decided the relationship isn't worth the effort it would take to maintain it properly. He's choosing the path of least resistance, which means doing nothing while expecting you to accommodate, adjust, and accept whatever he offers without complaint. The question becomes, what do you do with this information? You can't make someone value the relationship more than they do. You can't force communication from someone who refuses to engage. You can't create partnership with someone who is fundamentally unwilling to do their half of the work. What you can do is recognize these phrases for what they are, warnings that the relationship is in trouble, and make decisions based on reality rather than hope.
You can have one clear conversation where you name the pattern and express what you need, and then you can pay attention to whether anything changes or whether the phrases continue, because behavior tells you what words often won't.
The phrases we've discussed today, "You're being too sensitive," "I shouldn't have to tell you," "You've changed," "I don't want to talk about it," "That's just how I am," are all signals that a relationship is in serious trouble. They represent a man's refusal to do the work partnership requires, his unwillingness to communicate clearly, his choice to prioritize his comfort over the relationship's health. When you hear these phrases, especially when they become patterns rather than isolated moments, you're not overreacting. You're recognizing reality. The relationship is eroding. Respect is deteriorating. And he's showing you through his words that he's not interested in doing what would be necessary to repair things. At this stage of life, you deserve partnership with someone who values communication, who takes your feelings seriously, who's willing to grow and adjust for the relationship's sake. You deserve someone who sees problems as opportunities to understand each other better, not as inconveniences to dismiss. If the man you're with is consistently using these phrases, you have important decisions to make about whether this is how you want to spend your time and emotional energy. If this conversation resonated with you, I'd be grateful if you'd subscribe and join our community of women who face relationship realities with clear eyes and make decisions from strength. We're having honest conversations here about what actually serves us, not what we wish were true. Until next time, trust what you're hearing, honor what you're feeling, and remember that you deserve partnership with someone who shows up fully for the work love requires.